Welcome back. In this video, what we're actually going to be looking at is how to actually make our car talk to our racing gauge. So however fast the car is going, we can actually make it go through. So for instance, if the car was speeding up, the speed would speed up, and if the car was slowing down, it would slow down. So there is a couple of different things that we can actually get to do this, and to make it a little bit easy to use, we're actually going to be using a simple button to actually make that go up and down. Now, one of the things that I did fail to mention in the last video was to actually see the racing gauge without being in play mode, you do need to be in that game window. In the scene window, you can make changes. In the game window, you actually can see it visually. You can also make changes in the game window as well. So what we actually need to do is let's actually create just an empty game object. So let's go to game object and create empty. What this is going to be is this is going to be called a temporary game object. And all that an empty game object is it is a piece of information that has a position, rotation, and scale value. It has no visual data whatsoever. I'm actually going to make this one really easy and set that one to be the position of 0, 0, 0, which looks to be all the way out underneath our game over here. So it doesn't matter too much where the empty game object is because we don't actually need to see it. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to add component. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new script just for this trial, just to see how we can make our racing gauge work. And it's a good little habit to get into if you're not sure that you want to break another script or your script is interfering with it, just as a trial thing. So once you've gone to add component, go to new script, and let's call this one, I'm just going to write temporary, and the reason why I write temporary is purely so I know I can delete that later without any issue. So let's go temporary speed gauge. You can call it anything you want. We will keep language at JavaScript, and we'll go create and add. So now that we can see our empty game object, this temporary game object, has a temporary speed gauge script, which has been added to our main assets folder. There. Now we have called it temporary, but just more so for us to know we can delete it later once we've finished with our trial. And that's the same for this temporary game object as well. So let's double click our temporary speed gauge script in the assets window. And that will open up in MonoDevelop. Now, one of the things that you do have to remember with MonoDevelop is once it does open, you may have a script that you've already been working on. So we've been working on this trigger script, but we need to make sure we've selected the temporary speed gauge. There are a few little bugs in regards to not opening the right tab occasionally in MonoDevelop at the moment. So let's actually go through and let's see what we can do. So how could I actually make this racing gauge go up or down? Let's just focus on it going up for now. So the very first thing I'm going to do is let's go through to my speedometer and let's just take that to 20, just so it's a nice small number. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a button that every time I press the button, it's going to make the speed go up by another 20. Okay, so each time I press the button, it'll make the speed go up. So back in MonoDevelop, under my temporary speed gauge, I'm going to go through, delete what was there, and create another onGUI function. And this is to allow me to actually place a button on my game. And if you remember from the last video, or our previous script, we can actually get a GUI button. It says GUI.button, and then we give it a size. So we've got GUI.button, open bracket, and we need a rectangle. It needs its X position, so how far across the screen it is. And I'm just going to set it at 10 for now. And we need to know how far down from the top of the screen it is. Let's just set it to 30. We need to know how wide the button is. So let's set the width of the button to 100. And the height of the button, let's just set to 50. From here, we'll place another comma and we get to place the next part, and that's what the word actually says. And let's just go increase speed. And it's in quotation marks because that's what the button will actually read. So from there, let's close our bracket. And we also need to make this happen as an if statement. So if my button is pressed. And to do that, well, let's actually test our script first. So put my semicolon at the end, Control S to save, back to Unity, and we'll hit play. And you'll see that increase speed button there. It can be a little bit wider, so let's fix that. So back in our script, it can be a bit wider, so let's set 100 to 150 just so we can read the entire increase speed thing. And we actually now need to make it an if statement, so if the button is pressed. So we can type in if, open bracket, and at the very end, we can actually replace that semicolon with another bracket. And again, just like functions, we need to make sure we open and close our curly brackets, because anything that happens if the button is pressed, whatever's in between those two brackets is what happens. So from here, I'm actually going to do, you guessed it, a debug.log. And the reason why I keep doing debug.logs is it shows me that there is no problem with my button press. It'll be a problem with other code if it's not working correctly. So debug.log, and let's just say increase speed button was pressed. From there, Control S to save, and back to Unity, and we'll actually be able to go through, hit play, and then we can actually go through and hit increase speed. And in my console window, every time I press the button, it comes up for us, which is actually quite good. So what we actually need to do from here is we actually now need to make our racing gauge increase. So there's a couple of things that we need to do. And this is where it starts to get a little bit confusing. So my button now does work, but I want it to actually be a specific speed that increases. Now to do that, what we actually want to have to do is we're going to have to do a couple of things, and I'm going to speak you through all of them very quickly. So if it doesn't make sense, please ask some questions like always. So the very first thing I'm going to do is it's not going to be a debug.log. I don't need that message. It's not going to change my speed on that gauge. What I need is I need something that's actually relevant to speaking from a JavaScript coding language to a C# coding language. And the reason for that is the energy bar system, the thing that actually has all the racing gauges in it, so the energy bar T or EBT racing gauges and the required energy bar toolkit uses C# scripts. So we actually need to make one language speak to another. And to do that, we actually need to have something called send message. So to go through and do a send message, it actually allows my JavaScript script to send a message to my C# script. Now there are restrictions on this, but what I'm actually going to do is for the energy bar system, it's been set up to be able to go through and to change the set value current, and make sure your capitals are correct because it will only work this way. It will allow set value current, comma, and then whatever speed we want. So let's just set the speed to 100 in this case, close our bracket, and then with a semicolon. Now, it's saying send a message, but it doesn't know what to send a message to. So to actually set up our racing gauge, we actually need to tell it which specific racing gauge it is. Now, this is, again, one of those confusing parts, but bear with me. So I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it racing gauge. And I'm going to define this one as a game object. Now, a game object is something that's in your scene that you can use, or a prefab. So var racing gauge. So my variable racing gauge dot send message, and what this allows me to do is it says send the message to the racing gauge with this specific information. So let's just quickly trial that one to make sure that's working. So I'm going to Control S and save that. go back to Unity, clear out my console, and let's just see. So when I actually press the button, I should be able to see this racing gauge go up to 100. Okay, so what's actually happened? Let's just hit play again. It says unassigned reference exception. Now this is something that you'll see quite often, and the reason for it is we've actually defined in our script a particular type of game object, but we haven't told it what it is. So this temporary speed gauge now has a new variable. It's asking us for information. What's this racing gauge object here? So it says none game object. To fix that up, what we actually need to do is we need to select the racing gauge we want. Now, coincidentally, we only have the one racing gauge. We don't have any tachometers or damage for the car. So all I need to do is click and drag the speedometer with gears over to my temporary speed gauge from there. So if I hit play now, I'll clear my message first. Hit play now. You'll now see when I hit increase speed, it jumps directly up to 100, which is exactly what we're after. So now we've actually got a button that changes the speed. We want to change it a little bit more than just to a specific number because car speeds change. So how can we actually change, rather than just having a set value, what could we actually put in its place? Well, let's think about another variable. So a variable, again, is something that just holds information. So I'm actually going to create a variable called speed. Now, most variables are named roughly what they are meant to be kind of displaying. I wouldn't call this one purple monkey dishwasher because it doesn't make sense to the situation. Now, if I was to go through and try and race that, it will actually come up with an error. And it will say that it's an unknown identifier. Again, the unknown identifier means Unity doesn't know what that word means. So that speed word has to be defined by going var speed. And I'm actually going to define this one as an int, which stands for an integer or a whole number that you guys will be used to from maths. So var speed is an integer. So every time the button is pressed, the racing gauge will send a message of speed. But the other thing I want to do is each time the button is pressed, I want speed to increase. So speed is equal to whatever the speed is plus, let's just say 10, and then with a semicolon. And press Ctrl S to save. So from here, what I need to do is go back to Unity. You'll see that that error message clears. You'll now see that now I've defined a new variable. I have a new speed that's started. So if I hit play, you can see my speed is 0, but nothing's happened yet. If I was to hit increase speed, it sets my speed to 0. The next time I press my button, it will set the speed to 10. And you'll see the next time I press the button, it will set it to 20, and then to 30. So which is a good way to do it. The other way to do it is if I was to actually set my speed value before my message, so just the order I'm actually writing my code in makes a very big difference. So it's actually going to change what speed is and then tell the message rather than using from the previous one. So let's go back to Unity. Let's hit play. When I hit increase speed, it will set it to 10 because it was 0, but it's going 0 plus 10 equals 10. When I hit increase speed, it takes 10, and according to our script, it adds 10, so 10 plus 10 equals 20. So my speed should then become 20, and this will increase all the way through. So what we actually now need to do, and this is where it starts to get even more confusing, we actually have an entire working system, and this racing.gauge.send message is what actually allows our speed to increase and decrease. Now, having a button to increase and decrease your speed isn't how this game works. This game works off acceleration through a keyboard press. So I'm actually going to go through and help you out with a couple of different bits. in regards to getting this to work a little bit automated in regards to the car. So in Unity, what we actually have is we have our car game object. Inside our car game object, you'll see a number of different scripts. We don't want the light mapper object, we don't want the crash controller, we don't want the sound controller, we want this car script. And this script is where all the information about how the car drives is located. You'll notice that the script is called car, and if I double click that, that will open that script up in MonoDevelop. So you can actually see if you scroll down, there is a lot of information and a lot of code here in regards to getting this car work the way it is. Now, if you were to follow through the tutorial pages that they've supplied, you'll actually understand what all this means. Unfortunately, that's not what we're talking about in this particular tutorial series. So I'm actually going to help you out just a little bit. I'm actually going to go down to when do I want my racing gauge, when do I want my speed to be updated? Do I want it every 10 seconds? Do I want it only when a GUI button is pressed? Or do I only want it when the game starts? Or do I want it updated every single frame? I want it updated every single frame. So I need to find the update function. So where is the update function? And this is just a matter of scrolling through and looking for the word function and looking for update. So that's function start, not what we're after. And then we've got function update. Okay, that's exactly what we want. So somewhere in here, we need to place down our function update, or place our speed update, sorry. So I'm going to use the tabs along the top and swap back to my JavaScript temporary. And you'll see that this racing gauge dot send message set value current of speed is there. So let's select that value. Let's press Control C to copy that. Go back to the car. And we'll actually just hit enter a couple of times and then paste. So racing gauge dot send message set value current. Now I'm actually going to go through and comment and go EBT racing gauge system, just to let me know exactly where I'm commenting, because there is a lot of code in here that I haven't written, and it does sometimes make it hard. So let's hit save. And if I was to go back to Unity now, we get that same message that we keep on getting, an unknown identifier for racing gauge and speed. I didn't define either of those variables. So the very first thing I need to do is, you'll see how we've defined those two variables here. Okay, so what we actually want to do is let's actually go through, copy our racing gauge variable, and just to make this easier, I'm going to place this one at the very top on line 1. var racing gauge is a game object. Now before I save that, you'll see that there is script suspension going through. When I save this and press Control S and then go back to Unity, you'll actually see once it updates, oh, it's still got an error, so I'm going to have to fix this error. It's actually got an unknown identifier of speed. Now that there is specifically down in the update function that we've just copied in under the EBT racing gauge system of this speed. I'm going to do what I did initially last time and set it to 100, just to know it's been updated to 100. Control S to save, and when I go back to Unity, you'll actually see it when it updates. A racing gauge object has appeared between script and suspension. So you can see that my variable's been updated and it's asking again for that racing gauge. I'm going to grab my speedo, drag and drop just like we did before, and go from there. So now we've actually got our racing gauge, which is what we want, to send a message to it, setting the value to be 100. So go back to MonoDevelop, hit play, and as soon as the frames are updating, it sets it to 100. It's not going to change it. And if I was to hit increase speed, if I was to hit that increase speed button, the increase speed button still works, but almost instantly, it's been overwritten by this command. So what I need to do is I need to get rid of those temporary things that I used before. And to do that, I'm actually going to go through and in my hierarchy window, select temporary game object, right button click and go delete. Now that removes it from my scene view. I do still have that script in my system under Assets, under Temporary Speed Gauge. I will delete that in a moment, not just yet, just in case I need any of this other code. So from there, in MonoDevelop, it's now setting it to 100. And if I quickly play test, now that I've deleted that game object, you won't see that button anymore. So the last final piece of this puzzle is in MonoDevelop. Instead of the word 100, there is actually a command that we can use that's already been programmed in with all this other code. And that's actually rigid body dot velocity dot magnitude. Now just make sure that you do have rigid body with a lowercase r. It is one of those things that everything is case sensitive. And what this is going to tell us is that magnitude means the size. Velocity is like speed, and velocity is what is known as a vector, which means it has speed and direction. We only want to know its size, not its direction. And the final thing is rigid body is the physics involved with this game. So I'm going to save that one, press Ctrl S, and go back to Unity, and you'll see that when I hit play, my speed is 0. If I was to select that car, not the car, the speedometer with gears, you'll see the value current is 0. Once I start accelerating, you'll see my value current increases, as well as my revs per minute. Now, this car doesn't quite look, it does say I've won, but I'm still racing. It doesn't look like I'm traveling 40 k's an hour or 60 k's an hour. So, what we actually need to do is let's manipulate that number just a little bit to make it look a little bit more realistic. And we can do that by just going times 2. And by going times 2, what we can actually do is we're multiplying that speed. So when it's usually 25, it's 50. When it's 50, it's 100. And it's all that multiplying by 2 allows me to go through and make it a little bit more realistic. Now I'm just going to turn the sound down on my side. You can't hear it, but it's really deafening myself. So hit play. And just driving through, you'll actually see the speed looks a little bit more realistic as you're going through. So this looks like 80 k an hour. And you'll see as soon as I start to reverse, it actually starts going through and also giving me a speed. I can drive forward. And it gets to this level. But then if I start reversing, it also increases, which isn't what we quite want. It is a problem that we're not going to deal with in this tutorial series, but what it's doing is magnitude, it's getting the size, whether it be positive or negative, and making it a positive number. So we're actually not going to be using the speedo for reverse, and let's just hope that the player doesn't actually require to reverse for this game, for this quick little tutorial that we're doing. Okay. So, from this video, what we've actually learned how to do is we have learned a lot. We've learned how to make our racing gauge coordinate with actual scripts from another language or scripting language. So it increases by going through and sending a message. So it sends a message to our racing gauge by setting the value current to be this value. And the same with that temporary speed gauge, it makes a little bit more sense when you see it in a smaller option. Now, one thing that we haven't actually looked at is saving. You should be saving every single second that you get. So just if you haven't done that yet, just go File, Save Scene, and then go File, Save Project. You should be doing that as you go. Finally, I'm going to do a little bit of a cleanup. In MonoDevelop, I've got this temporary speed gauge. I'm going to close that one off because I don't need that anymore. And back in Unity, that temporary speed gauge script, I don't need that, so I'm going to right button click and go delete. So from there, I've actually done quite a bit of stuff that I've got. And now all I need to do is I need to set up in the next video a timer telling me how long that my time's actually taken to complete a lap. Until the next lesson, enjoy.